In this lesson, we'll discuss the importance of using solid naming conventions. The scene is 0 to begin. So whenever we rig anything, it's always a good idea to come up with a very good naming structure. That way we can organize things and find objects much faster. If we use generic names, for example, if I were to select this control object, simply named spline, that's not going to do the animator nor us any good. However, if we were to get a little bit more specific, then if it comes time for us to find and edit this object for whatever reason, with that naming convention in mind, we can do that with ease. So here's the type of structure that I like to use. For the prefix, I like to consider the object type. So since this is a control, we could always start with the name of anim. Alright, so we can add that to the name, and then following that we can put an underscore. And then it depends on what direction that this object exists to determine what follows next. So if this arm is on the left side of the character, which it would be, then we could use the letter L. If it's on the right side, we could use R. For objects in the center, we could either not put anything, or we can go ahead and add, let's say, mid. Now if I'm rigging the spine, I'm not going to go ahead and add mid. I won't add any direction at all. But one place where you would consider adding mid would be, let's say, the fingers when you're going in and rigging those. But again, for objects right in the center, you may not need that. So what I'll do is go ahead and add an L after this underscore, and then I'll put another underscore here. Of course, to just kind of separate this a bit so it's easier to read. Alright, following that, it's the object ID. Alright, so where does this object belong? What does it control? In this case, it's the character's arm, so I'd simply go ahead and follow this with arm. And then the last thing we can put in is how unique this object is. So I'll go ahead and add a 01 at the very end of the name, and then hit enter to set it. So the 01 is simply to let us know that there's only one of this type in the scene. If we were to go ahead and clone this, I'll use Control V, just to kind of show you this. You can see that Max will now add a 2 at the end, letting us know that this object is about to be cloned. So that either means that if we have a duplicate, it needs to be renamed, or we simply don't need this object. In this case, we already have an arm control, so if I were to duplicate this and leave it in the same spot, it wouldn't make any point to keep this object, so we'd then want to remove it. But just to give you an idea of why we'd want to add that 01 at the end. So let's go through and start to take a look at some other objects we can rename. Let's say this IK goal. You can see its name is very generic. It's not good for us. Now, if we were to get a little bit more specific, we know it is an IK solver connected to this arm. If we were to go ahead and take the arm control here, press the W key to go to our move tool and start to move this around, you can see that we're influencing this with inverse kinematics, which we will take a look at very shortly. But since I know that this is an IK goal, I'd like to use that as the prefix, and then following that, we can go ahead and add an underscore L, since it's on the left side. And following this, what it's associated with, what it's tying down. Well, again, that's going to be the arm. So we'll go ahead and add arm 01. Alright, great. What I'll do from here is head over to the layer manager. Let's go ahead and right click on our top shelf, choose layers. And I'm going to go ahead and hide the character's arm and armor layers. Now you'll see that we have another object here within the scene. This is a point helper, and we will be using these because they are a wonderful tool for helping us to kind of get things to function properly on our rig. This point helper, for example, is used to not only help drive the character's arm. You can see that it indirectly controls the arm. This is what we'd use to, the animation control itself is what we'd use to control the arm, but this is helping us to get to that level of control, and we will learn more about this when we start to develop animation controls and get to that topic. But this not only controls the position of the arm, but notice if we were to press the E key to go to our rotate tool, you can see that that also controls the rotation of the wrist. Also that we can parent this right back to our animation control and have a much more convenient way to control that object. So you can see that this helper here indirectly kind of drives things. Now you could take a look at its name and see that it's very generic. So what can we use for this? Well, I like to work with a prefix of PT just to kind of abbreviate that name, followed by _L_. And then again, it's associated with the arm, so go ahead and add that, and then a 01. Now how about bone objects? Well, if the bone object is going to influence your skin, if it's going to cause your skin to deform, which we'll also get into a little bit later, then we could always work with a prefix of BN, so bone abbreviated. Now, when we get to the end nub, chances are we're not going to skin to any of those objects simply because it would be pointless. It's the bone object that we need to have influence our skin. If we were to skin to the nub, chances are that's just more effort we need to put into painting weights and editing our deformations to get them looking nice and realistic. So chances are you're not going to skin your nub. So we could always use a prefix then of nub for those objects, but for all bone objects that will be skinned to, we could use again a prefix of BN. Again, following that would be what direction this object exists. That's going to be L for left, then underscore. This would be the shoulder, so I'll go ahead and add that to the name, and then a 01. I'll go ahead and copy that, and then we could use this to rename the next bone down, which would be the forearm. I'll go ahead and paste, and simply switch shoulder to forearm. Alright, we'll hit enter, and now we can go ahead and move to the wrist. So I'll go ahead and select that, paste, and this will be BNL wrist, 01. So if we were to take a look at the fingers, that'll give you an idea of how do you handle objects that are essentially a larger hierarchy. So you can see the fingers have several objects within each hierarchy. So we could always use an alphabetical naming convention just to quickly rename these objects. So you could see when we get to the pinky, here's a base. That's an extra joint that we need for deformations around that area, just to kind of show you the arm again, show you what that would influence. But then we could go ahead and start to name the others alphabetically. So the first would be A, the next would be B, C, D, and so on. Alright, so these are just ideas that you can use to help organize things. When we get into skinning, you'll also see why it'd be a great idea to consider your naming convention, because we can quickly go in and find only the objects that we need to skin to by simply searching for the prefix BN. But just to kind of give you a hint of this before we move to the next lesson, I'll press the H key so we can get to our select from scene dialog. And notice we have several objects here, but what if we just wanted to grab the bone objects that we want to skin? Well, we'd simply go to the top here in the find field and type in BN, and now when we choose OK, you can see that all of those bone objects have been selected. Again, it's a great way of working faster and staying organized. Alright, so that is it for this lesson. We have learned how to create a solid naming structure so that we can work smarter. In the next lesson, we're going to learn the most basic form of rigging, which is parenting.